Okay, let's pray. My dear God, we're grateful and thankful for having gone through another week and being able to get into the Sabbath where we can slow down and connect with you and our fellow believers and family. We are grateful, dear God, that through our life experiences every single day, we get to learn so much about you and about each other as human beings. And we are also very grateful for being able to have this time to actually discuss messages and truths concerning your kingdom that we all look forward to. We pray that you continue to guide our minds and our hearts as we take this time to once again discuss in this study. We pray and ask all this. Amen. Okay. So, pretty much going to be continuing the studies that I've been doing. And today I'm not going to do a a review on what I've been looking at this whole time. But I'll just mention that if you remember in the last study that I was looking at the necessity of government. Okay, can I just have a minute? I just want to share my screen. Mm, okay, can you all see my screen? Yes, okay. Right, so if you remember, we basically spoke about the necessity of government as I was going back to the the earliest histories of civilization and why basically government became necessary and what it was for. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour and pretty much go back to some of the if I can say the studies we've done in the movement. And then we'll pick it up from there, basically connecting with what I've been looking at. So when we look at the history of the movement, we have spent basically a great deal of time tracing the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, right? So, and the reason why we have done this is because we want to understand the time period in which we live in. Yeah. We want to understand the things that are happening today. And so we go back in order to understand the kingdoms that have lived before us. So we as a movement, we call them the kingdoms of Bible prophecy. But as we know, these are kingdoms that have existed in the world and that are known as just simply kingdoms, right? That existed and where people, even historians, philosophers, and different groups of studies go back to in order to understand what happened then to explain how we got to where we are today, right? So when we look at it, basically, when we look at the story of the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, which books do we go to in order to understand them? Anyone?
Great empires of Bible prophecy, if it's not Daniel.
Okay. Yes, Great Empires of Bible Prophecy is good because it explains more information. But where these kingdoms are introduced to us in terms of whether it's our religion or in our studies, because we are a religious group, if we can say. And there's a book that we read, which is the Bible. Yes, someone wants to speak?
Oh, Charity, sorry, I just wondering if you could make just so that we can see your Sabbath study as opposed to all the stuff down the side. I don't know if you want to, we can see all your, I don't know if it's you.
Oh, this,
Yeah,
okay. Sorry.
that's all right. I don't know if you wanted to do that as well.
It's okay. Sorry. Right. So, yes, like Ray has said, we go to the books of Daniel and Revelation, right? So, I think we understand this a lot as Adventists, and not just Adventists, but as people in the movement. The books of Daniel and Revelation have been very important in helping us to understand the histories past. And in the books of Daniel and Revelation, there's kingdoms that are brought to view or that are introduced to us. And in the book of Daniel, Daniel basically introduces us to four kingdoms. And then when we go to the book of Revelation, we are given seven kingdoms. Does this make sense to us?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So from then, we're just going to try and list all the seven kingdoms. And these are kingdoms that we have always studied over and over again. Babylon, Middle Persia, Greece, Rome, and there's the first phase of Rome, which we call pagan. And then the second phase, which we call papal. We call it papal, but I'm sure those that study the histories, they don't call them Rome pagan and Rome papal, right? And then the sixth key, three, four, and then the sixth one is the USA, which we say is in a lamb phase. And then the seventh is also the USA, which is in a dragon phase, right? Does anyone have a question on what I've put down so far? Okay, if anyone has a question or wants to say something, they can just unmute or raise their hand, and hopefully someone will help me if there's any hands to let me know. So when we look at these kingdoms, what do we usually call them? Besides the fact that they're called the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, what kind of kingdoms are they?
We used to call them Satan's kingdoms, but they're kingdoms of the world.
Yes, very
I used
good.
to call them
So
Satan's kingdoms. Sorry.
it's not just you. We all have called them Satan's kingdoms, right? And which means if they are Satan's kingdoms, what does that mean actually? Maybe,
That they've
yeah,
all rejected God.
pardon?
That they've all rejected God.
Okay.
But only Israel really is Satan's kingdom, isn't it, really? But anyway, let's just not sidetrack.
Okay, so Richard says because they have rejected God, and what does that mean then in turn? Yes, so Titus says nothing good about them if it's Satan's kingdom. So basically, what it means is that they're bad, right? If they're Satan's kingdom, because this is our understanding of the 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 great controversy. Basically, we are taking it from the story of the great controversy. We have this fight uh, between God and Satan, between, you know, good and evil, between, you know, basically everything that's not nice and everything that's nice, right? On one side. So anything that has got to do with Satan is bad. So if someone wants to tell me Babylon, we have always said it's a bad kingdom, right? And then Middle Persia, we've also said it's a bad kingdom. Greece is bad. Pagan Rome, bad. Papal Rome, bad. And then when we get to the sixth kingdom, what do we say? Pardon?
We say good.
We say good, right? So this is the sixth, and this is the seventh, sorry. This is the seventh. So we basically say it's good. So already there's, if I can say, it's breaking the consistency. This one becomes good. And then when we get to the seventh, what do we say? It's bad.
The most bad.
The most bad. The baddest.
Yeah.
So it's like a combination of all the bads that have been there before, right? So when we then look at this, I don't know if anyone would like to help us identify the inconsistency in what we have just put there. Someone who's not Curtis or Blessing.
The sixth kingdom, because of the lamb.
Okay, so that's the inconsistency, yes. And maybe I'm asking it the wrong way. Leon, did you want to say something? Your mic is on, open.
Oh, sorry, I was going earlier, but somebody said what I was going to say.
Okay. So basically, we have identified these kingdoms as Satan's kingdoms, right? We have basically said they're Satan's kingdoms. And when we go to the book of Daniel, yeah, when we go to the book of Daniel, in which chapter do we go to find a story that illustrates that fact of these kingdoms being Satan's kingdoms? Anyone? Daniel chapter 2, Titus, do you want to Try and say why or how.
I think because Daniel chapter 2, we have a contrast between the statue and a mountain, and the mountain is good.
Yes, exactly. So we go to the book of Daniel, chapter 2. And then there's a contrast between the image and the mountain. Of course, it starts out as a stone and then becomes a mountain. So because of contrasting these, this one is identified as God's kingdom. And then this one is identified as Satan's kingdom. So then when we are going to go to the book of Revelation, we always know that Daniel and Revelation are one book. And that Revelation is giving us more information on what Daniel has introduced to us. So when we're going to see these 7 kingdoms in the book of Revelation, we are going to just definitely automatically say these are Satan's kingdom. So when we then get to the 6th kingdom, it basically creates a problem for us, right? It creates a problem because there's no way that we can say that the 6th kingdom is a bad kingdom, right?
But
And even the narrative.
it did say lamb-like, so it was like a counterfeit of the lamb. So some ways to pick up on that.
Yeah.
So
And
it was
that's
like a
in
lamb.
chapter 13. Yeah, in chapter 13, right? But when we go to chapter 17, as we are given the information by John, it basically identifies the 6th kingdom. Okay, after many studies that we have done over the time, we've seen that the 6th kingdom is a good kingdom because it's different from the other kingdoms, right? So basically, the 6th kingdom becomes an odd one out. And to me, it basically sort of destroys the idea of having or seeing these kingdoms as Satan's kingdoms. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but because of that inconsistency, it makes it difficult for us to hold that principle that these are Satan's kingdoms, because if they are Satan's kingdoms, they're all supposed to be bad. So and the other thing as well, when we go to the last 2 kingdoms, the 6th and the 7th, what is something they have in common? What is it that we can identify about these 2 kingdoms that's common? Okay, everyone is allowed to speak now. But I don't want the same people to speak because I feel it would benefit us for all of us to participate. What do we have in common between the 6th and the 7th? Nothing?
They're both the USA.
Yes, they're both the USA. So the 6th kingdom and the 7th kingdom, they're basically the USA, right? And why do we say there are 2 separate kingdoms then, if it's both the USA? Why do we make the difference that the USA is the sixth kingdom and then the USA is the seventh kingdom. Why do we do that?
Because the glorious land.
Well, that doesn't really answer the question.
Well, it's overthrown the sixth kingdom.
Overthrown by who?
Trump.
Okay. Raymond says something in the character of how it operates is different. If you don't mind, Ray, would you like to speak and explain what you mean? If you're able to? Oh, he can't speak. Okay. So basically, okay, Ray is saying that there's something different about that kingdom. So basically, he's identifying that the USA goes through a change. Okay, the USA basically goes through a change. It starts off when it begins. Sorry, forgive my handwriting. It's really. So basically, the USA goes through a change, right? It goes through an experience where it begins one way, it begins as the sixth, and then it ends as the seventh. So somewhere along the line, something has changed, right? Something changed along the way. And then the USA that you see at the end is not the same as the USA that you see at the beginning, right? If that makes sense.
Okay.
Yes?
Can I add and say what made us think this way to a certain extent is that when you look at the lamb-like beast, you don't see it as a persecuting power, but when it becomes or speaks as a dragon, then we see it as that persecuting power. That when that change happens, so this is what I believe led us to think that the lamb-like beast is good, and then the dragon is bad. And this is you can mark it when the change happens from the sixth to the seventh.
Okay. So basically, we have this one single kingdom that goes through two different experiences, if we can say. It goes through a change. Okay, it goes through a history and it changes. And when it changes, it's now a different kingdom from when it began, right? So this is what we are identifying, that it begins as the sixth, which is good, and then it ends as the seventh, which is bad. So now, once we have established that, in my mind, like, okay, before we go to that, when we trace the history of sorry, I won't be able to keep up with all the chats. I'll do as much as I can. But for those who are able to speak, they can speak.
Can you see hands, Charity? Because Brian's got his hand up.
Oh no, I can't see hands.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, go on, Brian.
Does the seventh end bad though?
Yes, in this narrative, yes. It's the same kingdom, the USA, which begins good and then ends bad, because the seventh kingdom is a bad kingdom.
Okay, so I just want to get clarity on that a bit more. When we
Okay.
say it's the seventh is bad, ends bad. Uh,
Mhm.
are we talking about the Trump era, or is there anything further than that?
Okay, so for now, what I'm just identifying are the symbols that we take from the book of Daniel and Revelation at a simplistic level. We are not necessarily getting into the details.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, Charity, just to Brian's question, this description you're giving now, that is a description of how the simple description we would give maybe a few years ago. Am I correct? Or are you describing
Yes.
it as currently how we would describe it?
No, that's how we looked at it.
Okay.
The simplistic version. So, hopefully I'll be able to bring out the point that I want to bring out. And if it doesn't come out very well, of course, I can always get help from those that probably would understand it better. So, when we identify this, to me, what comes up to mind or what screams out, if I can say, is that one kingdom can actually go through a journey and has got an experience that can be identified at some point as good, and then at some other point bad. And good and bad is expressed, or rather, when we say a kingdom is good or a kingdom is bad, what do we mean? We are basically identifying what the purpose of a kingdom is, what the job function of a kingdom is, right? What kingdoms are supposed to do in this world. If we can say in today's words, a government, right? There's a job function that a government is supposed to fulfill. And if it's doing that job, then it's a good kingdom. And if it's failing to do that job, it's a bad kingdom. Does that make sense? At least that's how I understand it.
So if the institutions are doing what they was created to do, it's a good kingdom. But then when someone comes
Yes.
along and just doesn't use the institutions and does their own thing, it's bad.
Yes.
Extremely bad.
Yeah. Yes, so that's what I'm picking up on, right? And then so when we look at the experience of the movement, right? The movement we have basically gone through a lot of changes in how we understand these kingdoms. And we have gone through, if I can say, messages or studies that have forced us to have to reconsider how we look at some of these subjects. And for me, something that sort of stood out that I can go back to is how in the movement we have understood, if I can say, the story of the seventh kingdom. Sorry. How we have basically understood or traced the story of the seventh kingdom. So, like, for example, in our reform movement, we start the story of the movement in 1989, right? Time of the end. As the movement, we are going through a prophetic journey, right? And as we are going through this prophetic journey, we have an awareness at some point that we are in a reform movement and certain events are supposed to fulfill, right? And then, of course, along the way, there's turning points that occur that give us more information. There's things that we are looking at in the world, and these are turning points that are basically giving us more information about what's going on today, and we have to keep going back and trying to understand through the histories of the past what we are actually going through and where we are going, right? And then when we get to the history of 2021, or rather when we identify the history of 2021 up to 2024, there's something that we have always marked in this history that has basically would lead us to a point or to that pinnacle or the climax of what we have always been looking for or expecting, right? Which is basically the Sunday Law. And we have understood that in this history, there's a kingdom that's rising and then a kingdom that's falling, right? And we have identified this as the sixth or the seventh. And we have used different illustrations, we have used different parables to explain that experience of what's happening in that history, right? And some of what we have identified, I don't know if people still remember all the things that we have identified, the kingdom that we have identified as rising. I'll just remove the seventh. The names of the kingdoms that we have identified as rising here. I don't know if my question is clear. Anyone? Besides the seventh. Okay, the seventh is the symbol, but the seventh would be pointing us to particular entities. Fine, let me say entities that we have identified as rising in this time period before we reach the Sunday Law history. Which ones are they? Okay, the 144,000, the movement. Okay, let's talk about the kingdom in the story of the kingdoms of Bible prophecy. Because already, time of the end, we have an awareness of us being a movement, and our story has already begun. And yes, I understand what you mean, but I'm not talking about the movement.
Hi, Charity.
Yes.
I think we used to say that from Paniam to Sunday Law, we see the USA is going down, but we used also to say that the USA is also rising. I don't know how we used to phrase that one. And we
Okay.
also, yeah, something like that. But I don't remember if there is any particular terminology that we used to use. I don't remember it. Yeah.
Okay.
So is the USA going down, and then there is another USA that is coming up.
USA dragon coming up, USA lamb going down.
Okay. But I think there's something that we have forgotten that we used to say. I think this is something that Adventism also still believes in. And I think we held to that
It's about the
as
new
well.
order.
I'm looking for an entity, not an idea.
An entity that rises up from Paniam to Sunday Law.
Yes.
Papacy. Oh, okay. Yeah. Somebody says
Yes,
Tapas, I think I agree.
yes, we used to identify that the papacy is the one that was rising, right? So would say the papacy is rising in that time period. And then the entity that's falling, I don't even know how we used to do it, how we used to explain it. We would say the entity that's falling is the sixth kingdom, which is the USA. But at the same time, like Ignatius said, we would say the same USA is going to be there at the Sunday law. And we used to identify, yeah?
The
Someone else to
daughters.
say?
We used to say the daughters, because it's Spalding McGann.
Okay,
The rising, because the mother's had her day. The papacy.
okay. So we would also,
Charity,
sorry?
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think we used to say the seventh kingdom was the UN.
The
Because I think
UN.
I think that's what we used to say. I think we used to say the UN will be coming up and that you'd have a threefold union. So the
Yes,
papacy would basically rule the world through the vehicle of the UN. And the nation that had influence over the UN was the USA. So you'd end up having this
exactly.
threefold union.
Yes. So that's exactly what I was about to identify, that we would have this like a three-way partnership, right? We would identify the papacy going up and then, well, the UN rather, but the papacy would be the one that's ruling. So would basically say the USA is going to be over the UN.
So the papacy
But
head. The papacy was the head, and then there was the body, which was the UN,
yes,
and then there was
so
sorry.
yes, so you have this thing where you have the UN being the one that's ruling in the world because it's basically the vehicle that is able to reach everyone because it's United Nations and is the only vehicle that would basically be able to reach through to every country. But at the same time, we would say the USA will be the head of the UN because it's a conglomeration of nations. This is a United Nations, and the USA is part of it, but the USA is basically dominating within the UN. And then we would identify the papacy as well as being the one that's, I don't know how, but that's leading, right? So we had this interesting conundrum. But basically, what I want to identify is that for me at that time when I used to look at this, it was quite easy to say, okay, so the entity that's rising is the UN, and so, well, the one that's falling is the USA, even though it's going to be part of the UN. But it's like the why I'm saying it was easy is because we were identifying two separate entities. We are identifying two separate kingdoms, if I can say in quotes, where you can trace the story of the UN or the papacy, because we used to also have stories or parables that would identify the papacy quite a lot. And it was easy for us to put it down on a line and all of that, right? And then you would have that entity of the USA, a certain type of USA that's going down, right? But then once we remove the UN, and then we are now identifying that between this time period, 2021 and 2024, what's actually coming up is what we are calling the seventh kingdom. And then what's going down is the sixth kingdom. And once you make it one nation, it becomes a bit more complex, right? Because the seventh is the USA, and then the sixth is the USA. How it becomes complex is how to conceptualize that when we are now looking at the events that are actually happening, right? And then, of course, that's when we come up with different ideas and suggestions of, okay, there's a certain aspect of the USA that's bad, and then a certain aspect of the USA that's good, being represented by these two parties and everything. And I'm sure we are still trying to understand it a bit more. But I guess for me, when I look at the story of how the USA goes through an experience or a journey where, yes, of course, it's growing. And then in that journey and experience, we mark in the same kingdom, two kingdoms that can be seen in two different dispensations. It helps me to understand a bit more about the other kingdoms. I don't know if people would understand this, what I'm trying to say. But basically, what I'm trying to say is the idea of having the USA as one kingdom that can actually go through two experiences in two different dispensations. And then these two experiences can be termed good and bad. It then, for me, explains or gives me more information about all the rest of the other kingdoms. Because when we look at these kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the ancient Rome and then the medieval Rome, we can then also look more into those kingdoms and understand that they would also go through a similar experience. I don't know if that makes sense for anyone. Does that make sense? If you don't understand, it's okay. You can say so.
Please, could you repeat it? In short.
Okay. In short. Okay. So the story of the USA being identified as two separate kingdoms in two different dispensations. Okay, let me rephrase that. The story of the USA being two separate kingdoms, right? And one being good and the other being bad, to me, helps me to understand that the same experience can also be seen with the rest of the other kingdoms that we call the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, or that we call Satan's kingdoms. So basically what it then means is that what we have identified in our story are the phases of these kingdoms when they were bad. But we then never touched or looked into the story of probably how they began or the time period in which they could have also been good. Does that make sense, Curtis?
Thank you for explaining what you were saying. Yeah, you clarified that, what you were saying.
Okay. So then when we then, like I said, when we then now look at these kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, I'll just say ancient to just make a difference. And then the other Rome, I'll just say modern Rome. Modern, not necessarily saying modern today. Okay, fine, let me not put modern. I'll just say medieval, since we still have Rome today, so I'll not say modern. How do you spell medieval? Yeah, that. So when you now look at these kingdoms, what if I can say Daniel and John were focusing on, or if I can say what we are focused on in the story of Bible prophecy is the time periods when they were bad. Or the experience of these kingdoms when they were bad. But we have never taken time to look at the other experiences of these kingdoms or where they began. Because with each kingdom that begins, if we are to go back into history and look at their stories, we would therefore be able to see that they actually also began, right? They began as good. At some point, or at a certain point that we can mark or dispensation, these kingdoms were actually good, and then they became bad. So for me, this is how I can explain why, as a movement, we needed to move from looking at the kingdoms of Bible prophecy as Satan's kingdoms. Because this is only, if I can say, if it's one perspective, or rather, it's a misrepresentation of these kingdoms. We can choose to look at it as one perspective, but we have to understand what we mean when we're actually saying they're Satan's kingdoms, where we are identifying them as bad. And like I said, if a kingdom is bad, it basically has stopped doing its job. Right? But when it's actually doing its job properly and what it was meant to do, then it is a good kingdom. So we move from looking at them as Satan's kingdoms and simply looking at them as kingdoms. Just simply kingdoms. Just like with human beings who go through an experience in life. You can't necessarily say someone is bad in the sense that we have looked at it, because otherwise it would mean from, I don't know if we can call it predestination, where someone is born to be Satan's agent and they're born as bad, and then they're going to continue all their life experience as bad. So anything and everything that they do is bad, right? So the same way with these kingdoms, we can't say the same thing. They can't be Satan's kingdoms in that sense, because they also go through an experience where they start off, like we have been saying, they start off as good, and then they can end up being bad. And that can also change as well. At some point, they can be bad, and then things can be fixed and they can become good. So,
Right, Charity.
yes.
Yeah. There's something that I think I struggle with when you say these kingdoms are actually good. What do we mean they are good? Because this good is it a prophetic good, or it's it's a good, it's actually a good, or we are saying prophecy identifies them as good, so they are good. What do we mean when we say these kingdoms are good? Because we don't see any good work compared to the bad, because they do bad things. You understand? These kingdoms, they do bad things. They kill people. Because the moment you say good, when you come to our history, to the history that we can relate with, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and all those realms were not yet. It's not a history that we can identify with quick enough. But talk about the world wars, talk about the genocide, talk about the killing that happened in Germany during Hitler's time, etc. I struggle to say these world kingdoms are actually not Satan's kingdoms because they do evil. So this good, is it a prophetic good? My question.
Okay. So this
Raymond's
is
written in the chat. Sorry, Charity. Raymond's written in the
yeah,
chat.
go on.
Help to answer his question. I know he could, because he was talking probably so.
Okay.
Raymond's book, do we see the intent for a kingdom doing its job in Daniel 4:20-22? A tree that provides nourishment and shelter for all the different inhabitants of the world. Obviously,
Yes.
Nebuchadnezzar took it too far and went off the rails, but we do get a glimpse of a good kingdom in this vision. But
Yeah.
do we glimpse of a good kingdom? Yeah, in this vision.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually helps to also explain, because when Daniel is speaking about the tree that provides nourishment and shelter for all different inhabitants of the world, he was actually talking about Babylon, if I remember, and how it's represented in that book of Daniel, in that parable. It shows you that that's what Babylon was in that time period. It was actually providing nourishment and shelter for all different inhabitants of the world. It's a job that it was actually doing. And then, of course, you have at some point where it stops doing that. So you can see that experience of that kingdom being good because it was already doing it. It's not necessarily Daniel who was saying, this is what Babylon is supposed to be. That's what it actually was. And yeah, things changed at some point and it became bad. So when we are identifying these kingdoms as being good, and the reason why I chose these ones is because for us it's relatable, because we have studied these kingdoms for a long time. And also at the same time, when we have studied them, we've always looked at them in a negative way. But again, when you go and actually do more study on these kingdoms, you realize that the world would not be where it is today without the input and all the work and the foundations that have been put in place by these particular kingdoms. And that's something that we also want to look at and identify, that these kingdoms, we have taken a lot of time focusing on them as being bad. And yes, it has done its job to identify certain points for us. But for us to be more benefited and understand more of the work that God has been doing in this world, we can't just only focus on one perspective. Like, for example, like what I said, Ignatius, if you look at human beings in general, human beings are people who go through different experiences in life. At one point, you can do bad things, but at another point, you can do good things. So you can't then say because someone has done something bad, you simply, if I can say, blur out or just erase everything good that they have done, or whatever contribution that they have put in place that has been significant just because they have done something bad at some point. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yes, yeah, that is sunk in. That is sunk in. Thank you.
So that's what I'm trying to identify. And if one of the reasons why I've been going back to the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, or rather why I go back there, is because these are like one of the oldest kingdoms in which, of course, archaeology has found a lot of information on, and they've gotten to learn a lot more about how people used to live in that time, right? So before we go to look at a bit more information on that, so far, does anyone want to ask a question or add more information on what I have said? On how, as a movement, like for me, that's how I see it, how we have moved from looking at these kingdoms as Satan's kingdoms to looking at them as simply just kingdoms. And those kingdoms, meaning they are living their life and they go through experiences of good and bad.
Charity, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So can you scroll up a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. Where you
Up.
yeah, that's that right there. Oh,
Okay.
there's a lag. Sorry. The part where you
Sorry.
have sixth kingdom, seventh kingdom, and then you put USA 6 equals good, USA 7 equals bad. I think it's slightly underneath this.
Yeah.
Here we go. So, from what I understand, you're saying, are you saying that USA will go through two phases in itself, that is good and bad, and the bad is 7 and the good is 6, and so 7 is uniquely bad in and of itself, and 6 is uniquely good in and of itself? Yeah, what exactly are you drawing from that?
Okay. So when I was looking at this, trying to understand the story of the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, I was basically looking at the story that we've been given by John, right? And how he identifies that you have the sixth kingdom, this kingdom that rises up, the lamb-like beast, right? Which we term as the USA. And how when it's rising up is the sixth kingdom. And then at some point it's going to speak like a dragon, which is basically the seventh, which is bad. So from that story, when John is identifying it, how I have understood it from how we have studied it is that the USA basically begins as good. So that means there should be a theme or a story that we are tracing that identifies the USA as beginning good and then ending bad. So, like I said, I'm not getting into a lot of detail. Probably goes to what Brian was saying as well. I'm not getting into a lot of detail. I was just looking at it from just basically what we are being given. Okay, you have this one entity, and why is it identified as two separate kingdoms? So if it's being identified as two separate kingdoms, there's something about that particular entity or kingdom that changes along the way. Something that happens. It starts off as the sixth, and then at some point it's the seventh. Or we identify it as being the seventh. So there's something that happens along the way that changes it, and it becomes the seventh. So I don't know if I'm using it in a loose way, the bad and good, but that's how I'm understanding it so far. Yes?
Oh, Titus has his hand up.
Okay. Before you speak, Titus, I'll just go back to Curtis. I don't know if that clarifies anything for you, Curtis.
Yes. I wasn't getting bogged down on the terms good and bad.
Okay.
So I was. It was more so. to put it, is there anything identifiably good about the seventh in and of itself? So once the USA becomes the seventh.
Okay. I haven't looked at that, to be honest. But what I was looking at is trying to solve this dilemma in my head of how the same country, or as we call it, the same nation or kingdom, can be good or be called, can be split into two kingdoms, rather, can be a sixth kingdom at one point and then can be a seventh kingdom at another point. Because this is the story that Daniel, if I can say, John is trying to point to us. So in the experience, because when we look at the USA anyway, when we get to 2021, there's no cessation that happens, if you understand what I'm saying. There's no splitting of one entity, splitting from another entity. You have, if I can say, a good entity that goes one direction and a bad entity that goes another direction. It's just the same country, which is going through its political upheavals, if I can say. But when we then identify it in prophecy, we just mark this point and say, when this particular event, it doesn't have to be one event, when these particular things happen at that point, this nation ceases to be the sixth kingdom and it becomes the seventh, right? And then when we are identifying it as the sixth kingdom, there is the aspect of it being a lamb, because these are the symbols that we are given. And then when we identify it as the seventh, there is the dragon aspect that's put there. So in the story that we have and the symbols that we are given, it requires, I guess in my mind, for me to identify this nation in that phase before 2021 as good, and then after 2021 as bad. I sort of understand where you're coming from, Curtis.
I'm not coming from anywhere. I was just trying to understand
okay.
what you are, what point you are
making.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, to be honest, I haven't really solved the whole idea of how the seventh kingdom is another kingdom or another nation which can start off as good and then become bad. In my mind, so far, I haven't properly understood that perspective. What I'm still trying to understand is the, how we are changing from these nations being Satan's kingdoms to simply just being kingdoms. And for me, what stood out the most was the USA as being one nation, because we live in a time period where we can see the USA and we can see that it's still the same nation. There's no splitting in terms of a certain group of people going one direction because they can't agree on ideology. Yes, you have politics and polarization, but it's still the same country. But we still identify a certain portion as being the sixth kingdom, which is lamb, like John says, and then the seventh. Another portion being the seventh, which is the dragon-like characteristics. Right, Titus.
Okay.
Do you still have your hand up?
Yeah.
Sorry, did anyone want to say any
Sorry, Richard, we can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Was it just
Sorry, Richard. If you can hear me, can I please give the people who have their hands up first, and then we'll come to you. If you want to speak, you can just raise your hand, and then we'll start with Titus, then we go to Blessing, then we'll come to you. Yeah. Yes, go on, Titus.
I was thinking about the question that was asked, which was how do we feel? Why would we feel the kingdoms as bad and sorry, as good, and yet they had some things, or they did bad things? And I was thinking about our approach also in the past about, we say the kingdom of God, like the church of God, and I think sometimes in the past we said, yes, it's the kingdom of God, but if we go back to the history of the church did the same things that the world did. I mean, like Israel. And if we have a balanced approach, compare and contrast and all that, then it would not be fair to say the kingdoms of the world are evil, and yet we have the same things happening in the church, and we have a way of explaining it. So the same way we would explain the issues with the churches, I'm not sure, or it's the same way that we would also handle the issues of the world, because we know, I think for me, before we have Babylon, we have a kingdom that comes before Babylon, which is Israel, and Israel is God's church. And because we have like the diadem from Israel to Babylon, and then it goes all the way to the seventh kingdom, and of course we don't mark Israel. So basically, the same way we approach the church, I think, or the church is the same way we should approach the kingdoms.
Mhm. So yeah, basically, we have to be consistent, like I'm saying, because the same things of genocides, people being killed, and whether we identify the unfairness and inequality that we see in the world, you can see it also with the kingdoms that we say are good, which is basically Israel. You know, there are a lot of problems as well. And it's important to identify to have a holistic approach. And then when we are now tracing a certain story, identify that perspective as not the only perspective, but, as a perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, Blessing?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to go back to the conundrum you mentioned about the sixth and seventh. Are you able to scroll down just slightly, a little bit? The list of kingdoms you have there. Yeah. Um, the conundrum that you have seems to be the same for Rome, if you notice, because
Okay.
the imperial phase and the medieval phase, it's the same kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you identified both of them as good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying the conundrum could be resolved by that. The same nation can have two different phases and still be good.
Oh, okay. So you're making ancient Rome and medieval Rome as one like the USA.
Well, I'm not making it one, but it is one. Like it was literally the same geography, if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Same kingdom.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah, that's all I was.
But then, I think it then causes another problem, maybe, because was asking if there's room for the seventh kingdom starting off as good.
I don't think so, because what I'm saying is, if you say ancient Rome was good, which I think is what you wrote there, and then you said medieval Rome was good, that answers the question about the USA.
Perhaps if you draw it out, Charity.
Yeah, let me try. What am I putting down?
So you can put ancient Rome, like what you did,
Mm-hmm.
and then you said ancient Rome was good. because you said, because I think when you started the lesson, you were like, uh, we've said all these kingdoms are bad except one, but that's not consistent. So skipping all the steps you've taken very well, you then said ancient Rome is good, right?
Yes.
And then you said ancient Rome is replaced by medieval Rome, but still Rome, and you said good.
Mm.
So if you then put USA there, it has to work the same. If you're being consistent with what you said earlier.
So in this
USA
case,
6
USA,
would
it
be.
should be the same USA.
What I'm
One.
saying is the one that follows medieval Rome in your list is USA 6th,
Mm. That's what I'm
and
saying,
it's
that
good.
I would then, to be consistent, I would have to then say USA 7 and then say
That's
good.
that's exactly my point. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying your model answers your own conundrum.
I know. Okay, it gives me more questions, but anyway, it's okay. Yeah, so Curtis, that's what you were saying?
I guess I was asking to prompt to prompt the discussion along.
Yeah, I know. And I wanted to stay away from it. But I guess it came back still.
Charity, can you just clarify what we're doing? I suppose, are you trying to understand how a kingdom can go from good to bad? Or is it the fact, the concept that, what is the question again?
Okay, so where I was starting from is the idea that we've had about kingdoms.
Yeah.
Because our narrative or perspective as people in the movement or Adventists is from prophecy. And how we have identified prophecy is that this example of the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, that we say the kingdoms of Bible prophecy, they're identified as being bad, right? And that's why we came to a point where we said they are Satan's kingdoms because they are bad, right? But then when we go to John identifies 7 kingdoms, right? And of all the 7, one is identified as good, and all the rest are said to be bad. And I am saying it would be very inconsistent if we do that, because if they are all Satan's kingdoms, then they have to be all bad. So then why is one good, right? And then from there, I considered the story of the USA because the 6th and the 7th is the same nation or it's the same kingdom. And it has a phase that is identified as good and then a phase that is identified as bad, right? So I was saying, can't we see the same thing with all the rest of the other kingdoms where they can be good at one point and they can be bad at another point, right? So if that's the case, then we can't continue to call them Satan's kingdoms because Satan's kingdoms implies that they are bad all throughout. There's nothing good that they are doing. But we know that's not even true as well, because there's much good that can be seen in these kingdoms, right? So now from there, so far, Emma, does that make sense? Before I go to the conundrum that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was clear before, I think. Sorry. I think it's just
okay.
This last part is the problem. It's been made more difficult because go on.
Yes.
What were you going to say?
Yes. So now how I was explaining it, because I was saying, I was trying to understand because Elder Baminda has spoken about this issue of how we have moved over time as a movement from seeing these kingdoms of Bible prophecy, or these kingdoms rather, as Satan's kingdoms, to just simply being kingdoms, right? Because these kingdoms, they go through phases, they go through experiences where they're good and they are bad, right? So they're just simply kingdoms, right? So I was now taking the USA as an example and saying the USA, according to Daniel and John, has two experiences as one entity. It has the experience of being the sixth kingdom, and it also has the experience of being the seventh kingdom. And as the sixth kingdom, it's a good kingdom. As the seventh kingdom, it's a bad kingdom. Right? You are okay so far?
Yeah.
So from then, there was a question brought about by Curtis that was basically prompting more discussion, where he was saying, okay, so if we are identifying the seventh kingdom, because even if, yeah, it's the USA and it's the seventh kingdom. Let me just write it down here. USA can be split into two kingdoms, right? The sixth kingdom and then the seventh kingdom. So he is saying, so is there a place in our story where we can see the seventh kingdom going through a similar experience as well, where it can start off as good and then becomes bad, right? So I don't know what we would then say about the sixth kingdom. So it's basically saying, is there a place where we can identify this kingdom starting off as good and then becoming bad? Just like, and then Blessing said, what can help us to identify or explain that conundrum is the story of Rome, because Rome is the same nation, if I can say, if it's the same kingdom, but it goes through phases. It goes through, you have what we identify as the ancient Rome, and then what we identify as medieval Rome. So ancient Rome, we have said it was a good kingdom, and then medieval Rome is also a good kingdom. So can we not say the same thing about the USA? The sixth is good and the seventh is good. Does that make sense, Emma?
Yes, so you're paralleling it with Rome.
Yes.
I think the challenge which you alluded to earlier is the fact that we've seen how we used to see bad and good. So obviously we saw it in a very, I don't know if moral is the right way, but in the framing of Israel. So what these kingdoms did to Israel or to God's people is what makes them bad. So we see, you know, Babylon throwing Daniel into a fiery furnace or his friends. And we say it's all about persecution and badness. That was make them bad is the fact they treat these God's people badly. And that's the perspective. And I think we're broadening that viewpoint and seeing that this is not actually about, obviously, us or God's people. It's about government and how they treat people. So when we go to Daniel 4, we see Babylon is supposed to be this protecting, safe place. And it starts out that way in the way it even treats Daniel, the way it treats its captors. It doesn't just kill everyone, it takes them and educates them. So there's principles there you can see of the way that they govern. But it's quite hard to see that picture of Rome, the good, from just the Bible. If, for instance, you go, well, exactly. See that from Daniel 2, for instance, which is where we get the whole modeling that it's all bad. And that's the foundation of all the prophecy. So we start there and we go completely off track because it's all, you know, like you said at the beginning, the statue is bad and the stone comes and is the good part. So, and now we're looking into the depth of it, which we see from 17, that there's more to this story than meets the eye. And it's the whole thing about what you see is not all there is, that it's more complicated and it goes from good to bad. And the good to bad, I think my struggle is that seventh, what makes it good from 2021, what actually is good about it, because we'd say it's an increase of executive power, for instance, that's what we mark as a change. But we'd say that's not particularly good, this increase of executive power. So why is it why it's still good is because Biden doesn't abuse that power and is still looking after the people, I think, because that's what you said as well. You said what makes it good is whether they look after the people. What makes it bad is when they stop doing that job and stop looking after the people. So the seventh is still looking after people, and we've marked the change because it's got this increase of executive power. But we'd still say it's good because it's still looking after the people. I think that's how we frame it. And then it becomes bad because now Trump comes in and stops looking after the people. Is that how you'd see it?
Yeah, so that's what we want to explore more about what kingdoms are supposed to do. Kingdoms or governments. Kingdoms, because we use the Bible. What they are supposed to do. And then we look at, I don't know, maybe it might happen in the next class because I don't want to rush it. We can look at more all these kingdoms and see whether we can find those principles within them. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, so for me at the moment, now that we have brought this up, because like I said, I did not want to go into too much detail on this because I know it's a bit more complex and it's some of the things that we are still looking at, but I guess it's okay. We can still look at it. It's fine. So Blessing, I don't know, Blessing, you gave us this illustration. Okay, before I go to that, the other thing that I felt might also be important for us to understand how we can identify the good and the bad when we now look at the events and the things that are happening today or whatever time period that we go to, is to first understand the symbols that we have been given to basically have like a structure. And when we agreed on those symbols, and I don't know if I can say the logic and the structure, then it will be easier for us to go and now look at more of the detail on what actually happened and identify the things that were actually happening within these kingdoms that would show the types of governments they were, right? So that's part of what I was also trying to look at. That's why I wasn't really talking about Trump a lot or getting into so much detail, because for me, I'm trying to understand it from that perspective, right? So since we are speaking about, we are comparing Rome and the USA, and we are trying to identify that principle of how we look at these kingdoms. And we have said that Rome has two phases, and in those two phases, it's identified as good, and thus the USA as well, with these two phases, is also identified as good. So what I was also trying to pick up is this story of how this kingdom can start off good and then they become bad. So now, since we have touched on the issue of the USA, we can see, I think we have already spoken about how the seventh kingdom starts off as good and then it becomes bad, like Emma gave the example. So now, what do we do with the sixth kingdom? Does that question make sense? Or do you understand where my question is? Anyone? What do we do with the sixth kingdom? Because how we have always understood the sixth kingdom is that it's good all the way. Is that true? Or it also has to start off good and then becomes bad? And how do we explain it?
I think.
Oh, okay.
No, carry on, Marshall.
I hope I don't mention things that were mentioned earlier because I was distracted a bit. I would say it would start good and then it would change, just like the other kingdoms. And I don't know if this example is applicable here, but Daniel 4, the story of King Nebuchadnezzar. That illustration, he has a dream of that tree, and I think we all know that story. But what we can pick from it is that the purpose of that tree or the government or the state is to protect people and take care of them. But when they stop doing that role, that's when they changed from being good and then they go to bad. So I was going to use that as an illustration. Yeah.
Okay. So are you saying, so what are you saying about the sixth kingdom then?
So I would say the sixth kingdom starts good and then it would have to change to bad.
So when it becomes bad, is it still the sixth?
Let me think about that one.
Because those are the questions that are in my head.
Let me think.
Yes, Curtis, you wanted to say something? I can't see hands, so if anyone can see who has a hand up, please let me know.
I think an avenue that we could explore to try and answer this question is start exploring what we mean when we say good. So good and bad, those terms are subjective depending on the context.
The story, yeah.
The story you're trying to tell. So when we are framing it in this story of good to bad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., etc., a further discussion would be useful, I think, on what we mean by good and what we mean by bad, what that transition is about. And then perhaps that can shine some light on 6, aside from, in addition to whatever structures we can pull from prophecy. So the specificity, yes, that we avoided at the beginning in building this simple story, in my mind requires going
more.
Yeah, going further.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I was trying to avoid it, because I knew that it would need more information. But again, it's something that we can look at later. But maybe I can ask this question. When we have always identified the sixth as good in the story or the narrative of prophecy, when we look at what Daniel and John are saying, have we always identified the sixth as simply good and then the seventh as simply bad? And we say the sixth is good all the way, and then the seventh is good all the way. Did someone want to speak?
Okay, yeah, it's Ignatius. I wanted to say we have run out of time, so maybe yeah. Yeah.
Okay, can I get like an extra 5 or so minutes to just round it off? We'll probably not go any further than this.
Yeah, I think it's all right.
Okay. So, when we have looked at the sixth, okay, maybe if I can ask this question, if anyone has like an idea of why the sixth basically, can we say the sixth kingdom failed and then gave way to the seventh, or the seventh kingdom conquered the sixth? How can we express it in that sense to understand that transition?
Hi, Charity.
Yes.
I don't know if this will be helpful, but I think it
Okay.
might be. There's another nation that follows this pattern, kind of,
Okay.
in the Bible, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Israel.
Okay.
Israel was governed one way up to a certain point, and then it was governed another way at a particular point. So I'll just say the one way was the judges. That was the first phase. Then
Okay.
they came to a point where they said, we don't want judges anymore. We want kings.
Okay.
So, same nation, two political systems. Maybe it might help.
Okay. So basically, in the times of God had wanted the nation of Israel to continue this way with the judges. I don't know if probably there was going to be a change at some point when the time was right, where it would transition. I don't know what it was going to transition to, but the people asked for a king. And God eventually ended up giving them a king. So what you are saying is that it's a similar thing that happens with the sixth and the seventh, that you have the sixth kingdom. I don't know what we can call it, if there's a principle that we can identify with the sixth kingdom that's there. Can we use the liberal international order with the sixth, and then the seventh, the illiberal international order?
I don't know what those terms mean.
Let's ask Blessing as the one who gave them to us.
If you're asking me, I'll just say no.
Okay.
It just complicates things, I think.
Okay, that's fine. Fine. Okay, let's keep it simple. So, with the sixth kingdom, it was, let's say, governed, or it was working in a certain way that was done away with. Or can we say the people, in the same way that they rejected the system of the judges and asked for a king, we see the same thing with the seventh kingdom, where people reject the sixth kingdom and then they ask for a king, and then they have the seventh kingdom. Does that make sense? Is that what you're saying?
So I wasn't saying anything. I was just saying we've got this problem where we've got one nation that has two phases. And I think the only way that we've been able to understand things in the past is use historical examples. So the first
Okay.
example that you had in your structure, your model, was Rome. I said, Rome kind of forces you to say something about the USA. And then I said, you've got ancient Israel is another example that could help you to understand the same nation that has two phases or two political systems. So that's all I was saying. I was just saying, here are two examples that could help us to get to an answer without particularly saying what the answer is or was.
Okay. So you are not necessarily answering the question I was asking about whether we can identify the sixth as beginning good and becoming bad, or it should remain as good all the way. Because to be consistent, we have identified all the other ones as starting off as good and then becoming bad. But with the sixth, we have never identified that it starts off good and then becomes bad. So wouldn't that be inconsistent? Or
So-
if it has to remain that way, how do we explain it?
So I wasn't trying to answer because I didn't want to be the one to answer. I was
Okay.
just giving something that I thought could help the conversation or the discussion.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
yeah.
But it didn't help my question.
Okay, I'm sorry. If you're going to ask my opinion, what I'll say is,
Okay.
did the system of the judges ever become bad? I guess that's I'll answer it by asking a question.
Okay, so by inference, you're basically saying the sixth kingdom is good all the way. If we are using that, the system of the judges as an example. Because I think with the system of the kings, we can easily see it, even when we're looking at the story of the seventh kingdom, like Curtis identified. I think it's relatively easy to see. But because now we have this structure that we have put in place, we need to be able to also explain the story of the sixth kingdom. And if it's going to be good from beginning to end, we need to understand why, because through juxtaposition, we need to understand why there's that difference and why it has to stand. So if anyone has anything to say before we end. Or if they have a question, we can put it down and then
So
we can
Charity,
hopefully answer it. Yeah.
right now, Blessing just said about the judges, and you kind of answered it there by saying, so we can say it's good all the way. Because I think the question was, was there anything bad about the judges? Did the system of judges ever become? I think part of the issue, perhaps for me as well, is that we don't know enough about those histories to say, or at least we can see some bad in there, perhaps. I was already thinking, well, what didn't Gideon go off a bit there? Was he actually good? Because he sets
I
up
guess
some
we are
really
talking
good-
about the system as opposed to the
Yeah,
individual judges.
it's how to look at that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Is that it?
Yeah, struggle to answer the question. Yeah,
I know.
like Rome, for instance, not knowing enough about ancient Rome and medieval Rome, the types of government. I guess that's what you're saying. We need to do is look at that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Most of us
I guess for me,
don't.
for these, I've looked at them a bit and I've seen quite a number of things that can be identified as really good, where we can actually see that the world today wouldn't be where it is had not those things been done. Because today we pride in human rights and the legal system that we have today, but we have never actually taken time to see or know where that came from and how it all began. Because we'll be surprised to see that most of what we have is actually not anything new. It's something that has been in existence for thousands of years. Right. So it's basically identifying those systems. And I think that's part of what I was trying to identify as well, that okay, if we are saying the sixth kingdom is good, then we're identifying some sort of system that is in place that we're identifying as good. And then yeah, the seventh, the same. And we also need to identify how it becomes bad. So in the same way, if we're going to look at Israel, the system of the judges and the system of the kings, and make those compares and contrast. We can go back into the history and look at it. I wasn't really planning to go back to Israel, but yeah, we can go back and look at it and then come up with I guess a structure or a robust argument to help us sustain the arguments that we have. Okay, so is there anyone who has something burning before we close? Okay, so if there isn't, let's pray. My dear God, thank you so much for this time that we've had. I have learned so much, even though I've come up with a lot more questions than answers, but it has helped me, and I'm sure it has helped most of us to have to open our minds and start looking at the world we live in a different way. And dear God, we are grateful for these stories and all of these things that we learn, because as we go through them, it changes our brains, it changes our lives in ways that we'll never be able to see sometimes, but we know just how much it makes us better human beings and better citizens and better people in the world that we live in, and even the relationships that we have with others. And dear God, may you keep teaching us, and may this help us and trigger our minds to go and study more and understand a lot more about the world that we live in and the work that you've been doing with us as human beings. As we understand the time period that we're living in, the east of the close of probation, you sure know, dear God, that the world is fast coming to an end, and we would like to glean as much as possible for us to have a better experience and a life that is fulfilling, not just for now, but even for the world to come. We ask and pray for all this, thanking you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Charity, for